Okay, so now we're recording. And so I'll drop a link to the notes for today. So if I go to the course schedule, that's the easiest way to find it. I'm going to close these YouTube tabs. And so we're still on this JavaScript intro right here. So I'll put a link to this in the messages if you guys want to take a look on your own computer. But you can also just follow along on the stream. Um, oh, it says I have reduced quality. Hmm. Um, that's okay. I guess I don't know if there's anything I can do about that. Let's see. Okay, hopefully that will get better. Um, okay. Well, let me keep the chat open. Okay, so this is a good chance for me to go over how to open up the JavaScript console on Windows. So if you're on a Windows machine, your Chrome will look like this, and there's still the same little menu, three dots in the upper right-hand corner. Does that go through on the stream? I can't tell. Well, anyway, you can see it on your own computer if you're using Chrome. So there's a little three dots in the upper right hand corner. You can go to more tools and then you can go to developer tools. And as we saw on Monday, that opens up this like elements area where you can look at the HTML and CSS of the web page. And that's very useful, but we are going to be looking at the console, which is where we can write JavaScript. So we just move over to the console. The fast way to do it is to hold Control and Shift, and I think on Windows it's K. No, is it J? It's J. Okay. So Control, Shift, and J will open up the console. And I'm going to go ahead and increase the size of mine to make it easier for you guys to see, but you don't need to do that. And let's go into our slide mode and catch up to where we were on Monday. So talked about expressions, talked about errors, and we stopped at Booleans. So we were working on some expressions just to kind of like quickly recap what we did. So we looked at very simple arithmetic expressions like 2 plus 2 equals 4, 2 times 2 also equals 4, 2 divided by 2 is 1, and let's see, 2 minus 2 is going to give us 0. So we can do all of our four basic math operators. Um, and then we started to talk about Boolean. So uh, we'll see some of the kind of like basic data types that are used in programming. And this will make more sense when we actually start to like write a program. But for now, we've looked at numbers, and so we can do kind of like math with our code. And then we can also make decisions with our code, which we typically do using Boolean expressions. And so a Boolean expression is just something that evaluates to either be true or false. And as I mentioned on Monday, a lot of computer programming in general is based on these on or off values. So one thing that we can do is evaluate statements to see whether or not they're true. So an easy example, 1 equals 1. And that's true. So the value 1 is equal to the value 1. That doesn't seem very useful, but it's something that we can do to check if we're making decisions about our code. Like, so imagine you're writing a program that has to check somebody's password when they're logging in to their, email or some service online. You're going to have to check to make sure what they typed in matches what we want on the server side. So these are the kind of things that we use all the time in creating programs. So this is a very simple version of that, but it's a very important component. So 1 equals 1, that's true. It looks a little bit different than what you probably have seen in your math class. You probably saw something that looked more like 1 equals 1 or x equals 1 or something like that. We use a double equal sign, so two equal signs together in programming, because the equal sign is used for a different thing that we'll go over a little bit later. So it's a little tricky, but just remember that when you're comparing two values, you use two equal signs. So we can evaluate more complex statements. So I could say something like 2 plus 2 double equals 4. And we know that 2 plus 2 is 4 on the left side, and on the right side we have 4. And so that's a true statement. If we try to say 2 plus 2 equals 5, that's going to tell us false. So JavaScript is going to look at that statement or expression and say on the left side we have 2 plus 2, which is 4, and on the right side we have 5, and those are not the same value. And so the result is false. So that's essentially what a Boolean statement is. We just evaluate different things and we get either a true or a false. A few other things that we can use, we can compare values. So is 3 less than 4? And less than is if you can't find that key on your keyboard, it's where the comma is, usually next to the M on your keyboard. So 3 is less than 4, and to create that, you have to use shift. So 3 and then less than, and then 4, and that evaluates to true. So 3 is less than 4. The next one, 99, is greater than 100. So greater than is just next to less than. It's the period key on your keyboard. And 99 is greater than 100. That is false, right? 100 is a larger value than 99. So that's a simple Boolean value. We actually won't really use those for like a couple weeks once we start writing our programs. Once we start making a little bit more complicated programs, we'll need to use Booleans to make decisions about what we want our programs to do. So let's keep going. So another type of operator that we can use is less than or equal to. So you may have seen this in your math class at some point. It's just a simple less than with an equal to afterwards. And so this evaluates whether the value is less than or equal to 1. In this case, 0 is less than 1, so that evaluates to true. And 1 is less than or equal to 1, so that also evaluates to true. And then we have 0 is greater than or equal to 1, that's false. And 1 is greater than or equal to 0, that's going to be true. So we have a couple other ways of comparing numbers. So another thing that we will go over as we are starting to use our programs to actually like draw things and make shapes and make decisions and stuff like that is the difference between different types of numbers. So you may remember this. I think integer is a term that you've probably heard in your math class before. Float may not be. A integer is just like a whole number. It's a number that, 1, 2, 3, 100. There's no fraction or decimal associated with the number. So something like 1 is an integer. A float in programming is something with a decimal or a fraction. So 3 divided by 4 is a float. It has a decimal point and then it has some value after the decimal point. So one of the things that's nice about JavaScript that makes it easier to learn is we actually don't really have to care what type of number we're using. In older programming languages, you had to actually know you have to actually like set the exact amount of memory that you wanted the computer to use to remember a number. So 1 would require some amount of memory, but 0.75 would require more memory because you have to know the integer and the decimal in one place. So in older programming languages, you had to be very specific about the types of numbers and data that you were using. JavaScript kind of lets us just like do whatever we want. So all of these things are either just numbers or, something else. So if we look at the type of 3, that's a number. And if we look at the type of 0.75, that's also a number. So, that's just our basic value. So we have numbers. We can do that with a Boolean too. So if I say type of true, that's going to tell me it's a Boolean value. Okay, so we have integers and floats. And the third data type that we will use in programming is called a string. And this is usually used to represent a string of letters or numbers or any sequence of characters that can be expressed on the computer. One thing to keep in mind is that our computer does not speak English. And so when we write something that sounds like English to us or looks like English to us or whatever language, the computer doesn't see it as something that makes sense. It doesn't see it as words or meaning. It just sees it as characters. It just sees it as this is the representation of I, and this is the representation of A and M and whatever other letters that you're using. And so in order to tell the computer that we want a sequence of characters, we actually have to tell the computer where it starts and where it ends. Otherwise, it won't really know what's going on. So for example, if I go in here and I just want to write something, like I want to give, let's say I want to give a user is signing up for, they're creating their avatar in a game and they want to give the character a name. If I try to say like, the name is Owen, like that, my name, I'm going to get an error. The computer doesn't really know what that means because I haven't told it that I'm actually writing text. So to do that, I use quotation marks. So I can say Owen like that, and now it understands. I don't really, the computer doesn't see it as a name. It sees it as the letters O, W, E, and N, and that's just, that sequence. So we have to use quotation marks when we're creating a string so the computer understands where it starts and where it ends. So we can use either single or double quotation marks in JavaScript. It doesn't really matter. The quotation mark key on your keyboard is right to the left of the Enter key typically, and you can get double quotation marks by holding Shift or single quotation marks by just hitting the key. And so I can say, I am a string. Oops, I forgot the A. I am a string. And then if I say type of I am a string, it tells me it's a string. So those are our three pieces of data. We have numbers, we have Booleans, true or false values, and we have strings. And that's pretty much it until we get into more complicated stuff. But that's pretty much all we're going to be using for the first few weeks of class. Okay, so this is the last little bit. This is going to be kind of confusing, but I just want you to see another thing that we can use JavaScript for before we get to writing our program. So a lot of information about our environment is stored in different variables in JavaScript, which is something we'll learn about next week. But we can access those through the console. And so we can learn things about our computer by using these values. So one of these things is the navigator. The navigator refers to basically the browser, like which browser is the user using. So if I type in navigator here, you see I have this like nice big chunk of data that tells me all sorts of different stuff about how this computer works. And some of it makes sense, some of it probably doesn't make that much sense, but you can see some basic stuff like the app code name is Mozilla. That's kind of weird because I'm in Chrome, but whatever. Let's see, the language is English. Platform is Windows, so it knows that we're on Windows. Uh, the user agent is Mozilla, and the vendor is Google. So it knows that Google created this. And so there's a lot of other information in here that could be useful. Let's take a closer look at that navigator dot user agent.
Professor,
Yep.
you went to console for
Y
that?
yes. Yeah.
Oh,
So do you have the console open?
yes. Well, I just closed it, but I'm gonna get it back.
Okay. So yeah, if you're on a Windows, you can just hit Control Shift J. If you're on a Mac, you hit Option and Command and J. So yeah, looking at that navigator.user agent, there's a bunch of information here. So it does know we're in Chrome or what version of Chrome we are in, although it thinks we're also in Safari. I guess this is just like what browser architecture we're on. Um, Another thing that we can access in here is the window. So the window, it refers to like the tab that we're in essentially. And so there's a bunch of stuff in here, all sorts of stuff. One thing that is useful is to know how big the window is. So we could say window.inner width, and that tells us how big our window is. And that's super useful for doing design, for doing anything visual on a website. If we want to design something that fits the user's window and, and it keeps that space in mind as we do a layout or something like that, we need to be able to know how big that window is. And so this can tell us in pixels how big it is. And there's also the height. And I think we can also, I think I don't use this that much because I think it's kind of a relatively new thing, but we can also use the screen. So let's see, screen dot width. Okay, so yeah, I can get the width of the entire screen and height of the entire screen. So that's my actual laptop screen. One more thing is the document. This is what we use to save all of the data that's inside the HTML document. And so if we look at this document here, we can see all the stuff inside my website. So if we go here, there's a little container, here's the content, and down here somewhere is the slide that we're on right now. And we can see that is my header for the slide, and that's that paragraph, and here's this little code preview thing. So we can access using the document any part of our HTML page. And we can also do stuff like I can say document.body, and let's say the font or we have to do style dot font size equals, let's say, I'll make it something crazy like 100 EM. Oh, that didn't, oh, yeah, that was that was too big. Okay, let's try 10 EM. Okay, that's still too big. Let's try 5 EM. Okay, so I can change stuff, on the document. Obviously, I wouldn't normally want to do something like that, but it's kind of funny. That's one thing I can do. I can also write stuff to the document, but this is actually going to write over my entire presentation. So if I say document dot write hello, it's just going to replace my whole page with just this hello. Uh, and I can respond to myself. I can say hi. And that writes to the document. So we can use JavaScript to control everything that's on the web page. And that's kind of what JavaScript was designed for, although it's developed to be a much, much more robust language so that we can do lots and lots of different things with it, including doing design and drawings, which is what we're going to focus on in the class. We're not really going to be like building web applications. We're more focused on doing design, doing multimedia, doing drawings and stuff like that, and then adding interactivity to them. Okay, so I think that is it for my JavaScript intro. That was the second part, and I'll stop recording for a minute and